Mr
Speaker, I want to start by acknowledging the members of Parliament who've been directly involved in this tragedy. Kevin Haig, Chris Ockenville, Damien O'Connor and of course Andrew Little, who was the Secretary of the Union at the time, and I think something like 17 of the 29 men were members of his union. It is next week the 3rd anniversary, next Tuesday, of this dreadful event, that dreadful day that I don't think those of us will ever forget. That dreadful day when we realised that 29 men were all dead, that they had all died, that there was no hope, and they had lost their lives in a mine in the South Island. How far we've come in 3 years. How far we've come. I have vivid memories of the memorial that many of us went down to. 10,000 odd people turned up to the memorial at the racecourse in Greymouth. I remember very well Peter Whittle speaking at that memorial, and the fellow workers of the dead miners and the EPMU down among the crowd, unacknowledged, the union unacknowledged, as if they played no part, as if they had no role to play in that workplace. I also remember very clearly that Peter Whittle was nominated for New Zealander of the Year. He was treated like a hero. He was treated like a hero. And when you think about Joseph Dunbar, that 17-year-old boy on his first day at work, who'd actually asked to go to work on Friday instead of Monday because he was so excited about his job. When you think about Joseph Dunbar and the responsibilities of people like Peter Whittle, it just shows you how much we have through the process of the Commission of Inquiry, of owning up to some of the things that went wrong and accepting that there's a legacy of terrible, terrible errors. It shows you how far we've come when we have this bill. I think an important thing to note, Mr Speaker, in this bill is not only the observation of the Pike River Commission of Inquiry, but also the observation of the Health and Safety Task Force, is that the failure that culminated at Pike River Mine, that occurs in our workplaces almost every week when the worker dies, has been driven by labour market and health and safety deregulation going back 20 years or more. While we all like to say New Zealanders should have the right to go to work and come home safely, we have ignored the role of regulation in making sure that happens. We have, in the 1992 Act, and the collapse of the responsibility of the Department of Labour and the regulator, we have been responsible for negligence. And one of the things that while I celebrate this bill with reservations, of course, I still do not believe, and I've said it many times, that the Minister of Labour understands the connection between regulation, between workers' rights and the way they are treated at work, and health and safety on the job. So there is a huge disconnect between the regulation we are making in this bill and the changes that he is pushing through to the Employment Relations Act. And I suspect in time, well, maybe we won't have to because Labor will repeal those changes, but in time, I think people will, I hope we won't be standing here saying that deregulation contributed to more tragedy like this. I also know that the pain of the families is far from over. I mean, how does a family ever get over losing a loved one, a 17-year-old son, a husband, a partner? I don't know how that happens. And I hope that this bill by then will be seen as a legacy, a positive legacy, a meaningful legacy, and offers some comfort to them. There continue to be many unresolved injustices. Kevin Haig talked about the lack of accountability, the fact that no government agency or individual or corporation has been held to account for the deaths of 29 men. And it's very disappointing coming up to the 3rd anniversary to have a government that's denying accountability as well, as evidenced by their refusal to entertain the idea of compensation in place of the company that has refused or been unable to pay these families out. I think we need to remember that this tragedy started and ended with systemic failures by the regulator and by multiple government departments. The licence should never have been let to open the mine in the first place. And then we had the failure of the Department of Labour, the running down of the inspectorate, so there were only 2 inspectors for the whole mines inspectorate, the terrible stories about how they had to scratch around for resources, even had to beg for travel so they could go and inspect mines. That is systemic failure and negligence, and not to take responsibility, not for the government to take no responsibility for the regulator, for its own government departments, by offering this family some compensation, I find really abhorrent. And let's not forget that 2 of the shareholders of the Pike River coal mine were also Crown agencies. And I'm talking about ACC and the New Zealand Super Fund. Now, we all know that ACC has a huge bulging surplus at the moment. Why can't the Prime Minister just pick up the phone and say, how about it? How about we help these families put to bed their pain? It's true that some of them will have had some small amounts of compensation. Many of them have not and did not receive ACC because they have the people that died, the men that died, did not have dependents. There wasn't, of course, a funeral, so there was no ACC assistance with that. They've had to fork out for travel and for representation. And it wasn't until some weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks after the travel, that the family were calling out for someone to help them. And I know that has cost them, not only in bearing the loss that they bear, but also it's cost them financially. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I hope the passing of these bills will offer some comfort to the family. My colleagues, Andrew Little and Kevin Haig, have referred to the concerns we still have about this bill, the things that have been missed or could have been strengthened. And I also hope that when we see the next health and safety bill, that the Minister listens and picks up those issues, because we all have a responsibility to make sure that we never see a tragedy like this again in New Zealand. And the government has a responsibility to help those families through this, but also to make sure that the new WorkSafe agency is properly resourced, that I understand there's now 4 mines inspectors. I want to know if that's adequate. But they have a responsibility to make this work. It's fine to pass legislation, but you've got to put the money in and you've got to make sure it happens. So, Mr. Speaker, Labor's very pleased to support this bill with, as I said, some reservations, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to it.
Dr. Cam Calder.
Mr. Speaker.